Welcome to our deep dive into the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. We've got firsthand accounts, historical records, even some early seismograph readings.
Wow.
It's going to be a fascinating look into not just what happened,
Yeah.
but, why it still matters over a century later.
It's amazing how this event still has such a hold on us. A city nicknamed the Paris of the West, poised to become a global powerhouse, brought to its knees practically overnight.
Yeah, it's almost Shakespearean, isn't it? This booming city,
Right.
brimming with ambition and innovation, built on a foundation that was literally and figuratively shaky.
Exactly. And it wasn't just San Francisco feeling the tremors in 1906. Globally, it was a year of intense seismic activity. Earthquakes devastated Ecuador, the Caucasus Mountains, Taiwan.
Wow.
Almost like the planet itself was on edge.
It really does make you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So San Francisco was thriving on the surface, but underneath those vulnerabilities were cracks in the facade.
Yeah.
And one person who seemed to really get that was Fire Chief Dennis Sullivan.
Sullivan was more than aware. He was practically a prophet, always pushing for improvements to the city's firefighting systems. He knew a major earthquake could wipe out the water supply,
Right.
leaving the city defenseless against fire. He even pointed to a recent report by the National Board of Fire Underwriters.
Really?
They called the risk of a major fire in San Francisco alarmingly severe.
He wasn't sugarcoating, it was he. In fact, one of our sources has excerpts from Chief Sullivan's testimony before the Board of Supervisors in 1905.
Oh, wow.
He was practically pleading for a new reservoir on Twin Peaks and an auxiliary saltwater pumping system.
He understood that the city's densely packed wooden buildings were basically kindling, waiting for a spark.
Yeah.
But city officials saw these safety measures as unnecessary expenses.
It's like they were deliberately ignoring the warning signs, choosing to focus on the accolades the fire department was receiving.
Yeah, which begs the question, would things have been different if they'd listened to Sullivan?
A question we'll definitely explore as we go deeper. But for now, let's go back to April 18th, 1906. Just after 5 a.m., the city's waking up, and suddenly, everything changes.
The earthquake hit with a force that shocked even those used to tremors. It wasn't just one jolt, but two major shocks, lasting a full minute, throwing the entire city into chaos.
Wow.
And remember, this wasn't just a San Francisco earthquake.
Right.
The impact was felt along a 300-mile stretch at the California coast.
One of our sources, a diary entry from a rancher in Santa Cruz, describes the ground rolling like waves on the ocean. He watched in horror as a fissure opened up, swallowing a whole herd of cattle.
Oh my God.
It's a terrifying image, isn't it? And the closer you were to the epicenter, the more intense the devastation. Back in San Francisco, buildings, crumbled streets, buckled the air filled with the deafening roar of collapsing structures.
Right.
One eyewitness account that really stuck with me describes the sound of buildings collapsing as a death rattle. The dust was so thick, he said it was like walking through a fog of ash. Can you imagine the terror?
Absolutely. And amidst this chaos, we have the account of the famous opera singer Enrico Caruso.
Yeah.
He was staying at the Palace Hotel and was thrown from his bed by the shaking.
Oh, wow.
Caruso was already on edge, worried about his family back in Naples after the recent eruption of Mount Vesuvius.
Talk about being caught between two natural disasters. I can't even imagine. But, in the face of such widespread panic, there were also incredible acts of bravery.
Yes, the story of former Mayor James Phelan immediately comes to mind. When the Valencia Street Hotel collapsed, trapping over 100 people, he rushed to the scene and personally helped dig through the rubble.
He didn't just stand back and give orders. He rolled up his sleeves and got to work carrying injured people to safety in his own carriage. That's incredible.
It speaks to the human element of this disaster, doesn't it? As if the chaos and devastation, you see these glimmers of courage, compassion, and sheer determination.
Absolutely. But as we know, the earthquake was just the beginning. As terrible as the initial impact was, the worst was yet to come. The fires.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the earthquake had set the stage for a catastrophic fire. It was like a chain reaction. Ruptured gas mains, cracked fuel tanks, sparks from downed power lines.
All igniting fires across the city. And to make matters worse, the earthquake had also damaged the fire alarm system and ruptured the water mains.
Exactly. Remember Sullivan's warnings?
Yeah.
They were coming true in the most devastating way possible. Firefighters were left scrambling with limited water and no way to coordinate their efforts. It was the nightmare scenario he'd been trying to prevent.
One detail that really got to me was the image of firefighters rolling in puddles, desperately trying to soak their uniforms to protect themselves from the heat.
Wow.
They were putting their lives on the line with every step they took.
It's a testament to their courage and dedication, but it also highlights the city's lack of preparedness.
And in a desperate attempt to contain the flames, they turned to a drastic measure, dynamite.
This is where General Frederick Funston enters the picture. He was the ranking military official at the time, and with the mayor's approval, he decided to use explosives to create fire breaks.
But our sources suggest there was some tension between Funston and Mayor Schmitz.
Oh, really?
Funston, known for his decisive, almost aggressive style, seemed to distrust Schmitz's leadership. Funston believed Schmitz was more concerned with his image than with actually saving the city.
And imagine being Ordnance Officer Levert Coleman, suddenly tasked with assisting the firefighters in using dynamite, even though you have no training in creating fire breaks.
Right.
Wow.
Coleman's account really brings this chaotic situation to life. He questioned Funston's plan, suggesting they blow up buildings further back from the fire, but Funston overruled him. The early attempts to use gunpowder were actually counterproductive, spreading the fire even further. Imagine the frustration, the sense of helplessness as they watched the situation spiral out of control.
By nightfall on April 18th, the aftershocks had subsided, the explosions had stopped, and an eerie calm fell over the city. But the fires were spit burning, silently devouring everything in their path. The author Jack London, who was covering the disaster, described it as a dead calm, yet doomed.
That's chilling.
It is.
And as we dig deeper into these sources, it's clear that this night of eerie calm was just the prelude to a much larger inferno.
It was the calm before the storm. As the night wore on, those fires would merge and grow, transforming San Francisco into a raging inferno. But that's a story for part 2 of our deep dive.
It's hard to even imagine the sheer scale of this disaster. We left off with San Francisco bracing for a firestorm.
Yeah, and the sources really paint a chaotic picture of that night. Thousands fleeing towards the waterfront, hoping to escape by ferry, while others headed west seeking refuge in Golden Gate Park or on the beaches.
It must have felt like the end of the world. And amidst all this chaos, you mentioned that there were reports of looting. Didn't Mayor Schmitz issue a controversial order?
He did. Faced with a complete breakdown of order, Schmitz authorized the police and military to shoot looters on sight.
Wow, that's a drastic measure. Was that really necessary?
Well, it's a decision that's still debated to this day. Some argue it was absolutely necessary to maintain some semblance of control in a city on the brink. Others see it as a complete overreach of authority, especially given the lack of evidence that the order was ever actually carried out.
It really highlights the impossible choices leaders had to make in a crisis like this. And it reminds us that even in shared disasters, perspectives and experiences can be so different.
Absolutely. Now, focusing back on the fire itself, by Wednesday night, those smaller blazes sparked by the earthquake had merged into a massive inferno engulfing entire neighborhoods. One source of firemen's account describes it as a wall of flame roaring like 1,000 demons.
These firsthand accounts really bring the intensity of the situation to life. And the firefighters, already exhausted and facing impossible odds, were now battling a firestorm fueled by strong winds and densely packed wooden buildings.
They kept trying to create fire breaks with dynamite, but with such limited water and the fire spreading so rapidly, it was a losing battle.
So what happened next? Did the fire just consume the entire city?
Well, as the fire advanced westward, it threatened Nob Hill, the neighborhood where many of San Francisco's wealthiest residents live.
Oh, wow. That must have sent shockwaves through this city's elite.
You can imagine the panic. Many fled their mansions, grabbing whatever valuables they could carry. But some stayed behind, determined to protect their property, even using their own garden hoses against the approaching inferno.
It seems almost futile, doesn't it? Trying to fight back a firestorm with a garden hose?
It speaks to a sense of denial, perhaps, or maybe just the desperate hope that somehow their privileged world would be spared. But the fire, of course, didn't discriminate. It consumed mansions and tenements alike.
It's a stark reminder that nature's power can level even the most rigid social hierarchies.
Precisely. And this disaster disproportionately impacted the working class and immigrant communities. They lived in the most densely populated, vulnerable areas, and they were also the ones most likely to be targeted by accusations of looting.
So while everyone faced danger, some groups faced a double burden of risk and suspicion. It's a sobering reminder of the inequalities that existed, and in many ways still exist in our society.
Now, as the fire approached, Nob Hill firefighters knew they had to make a stand. They realized that if the fire jumped Van Ness Avenue, a wide boulevard that ran north-south through the city, it would be nearly impossible to stop.
So Van Ness Avenue became the battle line.
In essence, yes. Hundreds of firefighters, exhausted and demoralized, focused their efforts there, hoping to create a fire break wide enough to halt the fire's advance. And what's inspiring is that they weren't alone. Citizens joined in tearing down buildings, clearing debris, anything they could to help.
It sounds like a moment of incredible unity with people from all walks of life, setting aside their differences to fight for their city's survival. But did they succeed?
Well, that's where the story takes a turn. And to find out what happened next, we'll need to dive into the final part of our exploration.
So the fire's raging toward Nob Hill, firefighters and citizens making a last stand at Van Ness Avenue. What happened?
It was like the city was holding its breath, just waiting to see if it would be enough. And then fate, or maybe just luck, stepped in.
You mentioned a twist in the story.
Right.
What happens?
So picture that the fire's roaring along Van Ness, about to jump across to Lombard Street, and then the wind shifts.
The wind. The wind that had been fueling the fire.
Yeah, it changed direction.
Wow.
It was a dramatic, almost unbelievable turn of events. The wind, now blowing from the west, started pushing the fire back on itself.
That's incredible. So the very force that had been driving the destruction became a key factor in stopping it.
Exactly. And firefighters saw their chance. They redoubled their efforts to contain the flames, and as the wind continued to blow from the west, the fire gradually began to subside.
It's a good reminder that sometimes, even when things seem hopeless, a little bit of luck can make all the difference. But of course, we can't forget the heroism of those firefighters and citizens who fought so hard.
Absolutely. Their persistence at Van Ness Avenue was crucial. They didn't give up, even when it seemed like all was lost.
So by Thursday evening, April 19th, the fire was finally under control. After 3 long days and nights, it was finally over. But the city was left in ruins.
The sources describe a scene that's almost surreal. Miles of smoldering debris buildings reduced to rubble, a silence broken only by the crackling of embers and the footsteps of those returning to see what was left.
I found a passage from a Red Cross worker's diary. It really captures the scope of the destruction. She wrote, "I have seen the ruins of Pompeii, but nothing compared to this. It is as if a giant hand had swept across the city, leaving nothing but ashes and silence."
And the numbers are just staggering. Over 28,000 buildings destroyed, entire neighborhoods gone. Financial losses estimated at over $400 million, which in today's dollars would be billions.
It's mind-boggling. And what about the human cost?
Officially, the death toll was around 3,000, but many believe the real number was much higher. Thousands more were injured, and over 200,000 people were left homeless.
To lose everything, your home, your possessions, maybe even loved ones, it's just heartbreaking. But amidst this devastation, there are also incredible stories of resilience and compassion.
Absolutely. Aid poured in from all over the country and around the world. People set up makeshift camps, shared what little food and supplies they had, and helped each other rebuild. One of the most striking examples is the role of San Francisco's Chinese community.
I read that their neighborhood Chinatown was completely destroyed.
It was. But even as they were dealing with their own losses, they stepped up to help others. They set up soup kitchens, distributed food and clothing, even offered medical assistance.
That's incredible. They turned their own tragedy into an opportunity to serve others.
It really speaks to the strength and unity that emerged from this disaster. People from all walks of life came together, setting aside differences to support one another.
So, out of the ashes, a new San Francisco began to rise.
A different city in many ways. Building codes were revised, more robust infrastructure was put in place, and there was a new focus on disaster preparedness. They had to rebuild from the ground up, and they used that opportunity to create a more resilient city.
It's inspiring, isn't it? How tragedy can lead to positive change. How a community can come together to overcome even the most devastating challenges.
It is. And, as we've been going through these sources, I keep coming back to Chief Sullivan's warnings. If only the city had listened to him. If only they had invested in those preventative measures.
Yeah.
He was so passionate about.
It's a haunting question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Could the devastation have been less? Could lives have been saved if they had taken his advice? We'll never know for sure.
But it's a reminder, a crucial lesson. We need to listen to experts, invest in preparedness, and acknowledge potential risks, even when it's hard to do.
Wise words. Well, this has been a truly fascinating look into the 1906 San Francisco earthquake and fire. We've explored the science behind the disaster, the human stories of resilience and loss, and the lessons learned that still resonate today.
It's a story that reminds us of the power of nature, the fragility of what we build, and the enduring strength of the human spirit.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope you found it insightful and maybe even inspiring. Until next time.